Mark Draven had seen it all. Or at least that's what he told himself as he gazed out of the small spacecraft's window. Humanity had reached far beyond the stars, and Mark was one of the top engineers assigned to improve the technology of new colonies. His tools were legendary, made from materials stronger than anything found on Earth, and designed to withstand the harshest conditions in the galaxy. Today, however, he was headed to Rijoma, a desert planet unlike any he had visited before. Mark had been assigned to help the native tribe, the Riomans, who were facing severe difficulties with their weapons and tools. They lived in the planet's barren deserts, a place where few survived. But Mark was confident. His tools never broke, no matter how tough the job was. They had worked on the moon, on alien worlds, and even in the deepest parts of space. Rijoma, with its scorching heat and sandstorms, would be no different. As the ship descended into the planet's atmosphere, Mark adjusted his glasses and looked over the blueprints. The Rijomans had long used traditional methods to craft their weapons, basic yet effective. But Mark had a plan. He was going to improve their tools with his advanced Earth technology. With these new tools, the Rijomans would be unstoppable. The landing was smooth, and the heat immediately hit Mark as the hatch opened. The vast desert stretched out before him, endless dunes of golden sand. He could feel the dryness in the air, the intense heat of the sun burning his skin through his spacesuit. But he had been through worse. A tall, striking woman stood waiting for him at the base of the ship. She was dressed in traditional Rijoman clothing, light, flowing fabrics that helped her blend into the desert's harsh environment. Her hair was dark and braided, falling past her shoulders like a waterfall. Her eyes, though, were what caught Mark's attention, bright, sharp, and filled with a quiet strength that made him pause. The woman was no ordinary guide. She was Sika, the leader of the Rijoman tribe. Her reputation was known across the galaxy. Fierce, skilled in survival, and proud of her heritage, Sika was not someone you could easily impress. Mark had been warned about her, but he didn't think much of it. After all, he had his tools. Sika eyed Mark coolly as he stepped off the ship. "You're the engineer from Earth, I assume?" Her voice was low and confident, but there was a slight edge to it that Mark couldn't ignore. "That's right," Mark replied, extending his hand. "I'm here to help. I've brought the best tools we have. They'll make a huge difference." Sika didn't take his hand. Instead, she stepped aside, her gaze scanning the ship behind him. "You think your tools can help my people survive out here?" She raised an eyebrow, a skeptical smile crossing her face. "We've lived in this desert for centuries. Our tools are made from the toughest materials found on Rijoma, not from some shiny gadgets." Mark's face tightened, but he didn't let her words affect him. He was used to people doubting the power of Earth technology. "I understand your skepticism," he said calmly. "But what we have on Earth is beyond anything you've seen. Let me show you." Sika's eyes narrowed as she took a step back. "You'll show me? I'll be the judge of that." The tension in the air was thick, but Mark couldn't afford to back down. He needed to prove himself. They made their way toward the camp where the Rijoman people had gathered, and Mark began setting up his equipment. He started with a simple tool, a reinforced wrench designed to withstand extreme pressures. The plan was to show them how Earth technology could make their tools last longer, work better, and survive in the harsh conditions of the desert. "Watch closely," Mark said, tightening bolts on a makeshift platform built from Rijoman materials. Sika stood with her arms crossed, watching him closely. "I'm watching," she said. "But I warn you, if your tool breaks, I'll consider it a waste of time." Mark didn't flinch. He had tested this wrench under the toughest conditions. The wrench had survived on the moon, in space, and in places where even the toughest metals couldn't withstand the pressure. There was no way it would break here. He twisted the wrench, tightening it with all his strength. The metal creaked under pressure, but it held. For a moment, Mark thought he had won. But then, with a loud crack, the wrench snapped in half. Sika raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a faint smirk. "Well, that was impressive," she said sarcastically. "Maybe your tools aren't as strong as you thought." Mark's face burned with frustration. He knew the wrench was supposed to be indestructible. What was wrong? The desert's heat, the sand, the atmosphere, nothing should have affected the tool. "Let me try again," he said, determined to fix this. "There must be something here I didn't account for." As Mark began to rebuild the wrench, Sika walked around the camp, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Mark watched her for a moment, but then turned his attention back to his task. He would fix this. He had to. After hours of testing and adjusting his tools, Mark finally produced a new version, a tool specifically designed for the extreme conditions of Rijoma. He hoped this time it would be enough to impress Sika. "All right," Mark said, holding up the new tool. "I think this one will work." Sika didn't respond at first. She simply watched as Mark tested the tool again, this time with caution. Mark applied pressure, pushing harder than before, and waited. The tool didn't break. It didn't even creak. Mark's eyes lit up with triumph. "See, I told you. Earth technology might be different, but it works." Sika was silent for a moment, her face unreadable. Then she spoke. "You think your tool is perfect?" Her tone was flat. "We don't need perfect. We need strength." Mark paused, confused. "What do you mean?" "Strength isn't just about unbreakable tools," Sika said, her voice soft but firm. "It's about knowing how to use what you have. The tools we make, they're not just metal and fire. They carry the spirit of our people. We survive here because we understand the land, the desert, the sand. Your tools, they may be stronger, but they're not made for this world." Mark stared at her, his mind racing. Sika wasn't mocking him, he realized. She was trying to explain something he had missed. "You may have brought something stronger," she said, her voice softer now, "but strength is not enough if you don't know how to survive." Sika's words lingered in Mark's mind long after she had turned away. He didn't know if he would ever fully understand the power of the desert, the power of Rijoma, or the quiet strength that seemed to flow through Sika's very being. But he knew one thing for sure. He had underestimated her. As the day turned to night, Mark sat alone, thinking about the challenge ahead. He had come to Rijoma to prove the superiority of human technology. But it seemed the real test wasn't about tools, it was about learning how to adapt. And for that he would need more than just the best technology. He would need to learn from the desert, and from Sika. The following days were a blur of heat and dust. Mark Draven had never experienced anything quite like Rijoma's desert. The sun seemed to burn straight through his spacesuit, and the sandstorms that came and went with alarming speed made the air thick with an almost suffocating humidity. But as he followed Sika, his thoughts turned to something else. The tools. He had never seen his equipment fail so many times. Every time he thought he had the right solution, something about the desert made his best technology falter. The materials he had relied on for years were breaking down. Sika had been right. Strength wasn't just about unbreakable tools. The desert, its heat, its spirit, it all played a part. And Mark had to understand that if he wanted to succeed here. "Are you ready?" Sika asked, breaking Mark from his thoughts. They were standing at the base of a steep dune. Above them, the sky was a brilliant orange as the sun began to set. Sika's eyes were fixed on the horizon, where a violent sandstorm was gathering speed. The storm was coming straight toward them, and they had to reach the shelter of the nearest cave before it hit. Mark had never seen a sandstorm quite like this one. The winds were so strong the sand seemed to swirl in the air, almost alive. "We don't have much time," Sika added. "The storm will be here in an hour. We need to move quickly." Mark nodded, still unsure about what to expect. His tools were ready, but he had no idea if they would hold up in this storm. The desert had a way of humbling even the most confident of engineers. As they climbed the dune, Mark kept his eyes on Sika. Her movements were graceful. Despite the heavy heat and the sand slipping beneath her feet, she was in her element, while Mark was trying to adjust to everything that seemed foreign to him. For all his expertise in Earth technology, he wasn't used to the unpredictability of this world. "You don't seem worried," Mark commented, struggling to keep up. Sika glanced over her shoulder at him. "Worrying won't get us there faster," she said. "If we survive, it'll be because we know how to read the land and the sky. You can't fight nature, Mark. You can only work with it." They reached the top of the dune and looked out at the horizon. The storm was moving faster than Mark had expected. It was huge, dark, and swirling like a monster coming to devour everything in its path. He couldn't help but feel a rush of fear. They had to make it to the cave, but the path was treacherous and the storm was already gaining strength. Sika turned to him. "Follow me closely. We'll be fine if you stay close and keep up." Mark wasn't sure he believed her, but he didn't have a choice. He nodded and followed her as they began their descent down the other side of the dune. The wind picked up, and the temperature dropped suddenly, sending a chill through Mark's bones. He struggled to keep his footing in the shifting sand, but Sika seemed unfazed. She moved quickly with a purpose that Mark struggled to match, As they neared the cave, the storm hit with full force. The winds howled like a wild beast and the sand stung Mark's face and hands. He couldn't see more than a few feet in front of him. He held onto his equipment as tightly as he could, praying that it would hold together long enough for them to reach shelter. "Stay close," Sika shouted over the roar of the storm. She was barely visible through the haze of flying sand, but Mark could still hear her. "We're almost there." Just as Mark thought he couldn't go any further, they reached the mouth of the cave. Sika ducked inside and Mark followed closely behind. The wind howled outside, but inside the cave it was eerily quiet. The coolness of the stone walls wrapped around him, offering a much-needed relief from the heat. They collapsed on the floor, breathing heavily. Mark's heart was racing, but he felt a sense of accomplishment. They had made it. Sika sat up first, brushing the sand from her clothes. "That was close," she said, though her voice still had the same calm, composed tone. "This storm is worse than most, but we've survived worse." Mark, exhausted and shaken, finally found the words. "I thought we were going to be caught out there. I didn't think we'd make it." Sika's eyes softened for the briefest moment. "You didn't believe we could. You thought technology would save you." Mark looked down at his tools, which had survived the journey despite the storm. "Maybe I did," he admitted. "I thought my tools were invincible. I didn't think I'd need anything else." Sika didn't say anything for a long time. She simply watched Mark as he fiddled with his equipment, still trying to make sense of what had happened. "You know," she said after a while, "it's not just about tools. It's about knowing when to use them and when to trust what you know." Mark looked up at her, confused. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the desert is unpredictable," she explained. "We didn't survive the storm because your tools were unbreakable. We survived because we worked together, because we understood how the desert moves, how it changes. You have your tools, but you also need to understand the land. The land can break you if you're not careful." Mark's mind was racing. She was right. His tools were impressive, but they were only a small part of the equation. The desert was a force that couldn't be controlled by technology alone. To truly survive, Mark had to adapt, learn from his surroundings, and trust his instincts. Sika continued. "Your tools can be a great help, but only if you learn to use them wisely. Trust me, there is no such thing as a perfect tool, but there is such a thing as perfect timing, perfect knowledge." Mark sat back against the cave wall, feeling the weight of her words. He had spent so much time relying on his inventions, on the belief that technology could solve any problem. But now, faced with the desert's harsh reality, he realized how little he truly understood about survival. As the storm raged outside, Mark and Sika sat in the cave, silent, but not uncomfortable. They both knew that the journey ahead would be even harder, but Mark also knew that it would be a journey that would change him. The desert was a teacher, and he was beginning to understand its lessons. The next morning, the storm had passed. The sun was rising again, and the air was still thick with sand. Mark stood at the mouth of the cave, staring out into the vast desert. He wasn't sure if he would ever be able to fully understand the desert, but he was ready to learn, and with Sika by his side, he felt like he could face whatever came next. Sika approached him from behind. "Ready to continue?" she asked. Mark smiled, a small but sincere smile. "Yes, let's go." Together, they stepped out into the desert, knowing that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them as partners, one with the knowledge of the land, the other with the strength of human ingenuity.